Our 5th anniversary. I'd flown in from Zurich, canceled meetings, planned every detail. Then I found it. A $700,000 receipt for a pink diamond necklace tucked in his briefcase. My heart leapt foolishly. I thought, maybe it was for me. Please stay with me as I tell you my story. And don't forget to subscribe, like, and share this with someone who needs to hear it. We were tangled up in sheets, the morning sun casting golden shadows across our Chicago apartment. Marcus was scrolling through his phone, and I was tracing future travel plans on his chest with my fingers. Barcelona, Santorini, maybe Kyoto. Just us, I whispered. He nodded, kissed my forehead, and murmured something about unplugging. It felt real. Solid. Like we'd finally carved out space for each other. Then his phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen, his face tightening. "Client emergency," he said, already sliding off the bed. "Give me 2 hours, tops." I smiled, tried to be the understanding wife, and watched him disappear through the door. 2 hours turned into 6. No text, no call. I reheated breakfast 3 times before giving up. When he finally returned, his shirt was wrinkled, his eyes tired, and he smelled faintly of expensive perfume, something I didn't wear. "Don't ask," he said, setting his briefcase down like a full stop. I didn't. The next morning, I brought up our trip again, half excited, half hoping the day before had just been a blip. But he shook his head. "I can't. This project is huge, Elena. Game-changing." I thought we agreed. No work talk during personal time. That was his favorite move, using our boundaries as walls I wasn't allowed to climb. I nodded slowly, biting the inside of my cheek. I didn't push back. Not yet. Instead, I watched him rush out again, phone glued to his ear, already lost in another digital battlefield. And I told myself, as I always did, that it was temporary, that the man who held me so tenderly one night would come back, just as committed the next. But a different truth was starting to take shape. One where I wasn't a partner, just a placeholder. The vacation became a metaphor, something we planned, talked about, dreamed of, but never lived. Something always more urgent pulled him away. And still I waited, because I believed in the us we used to be. Because I thought sacrifices led to stronger foundations. Because I didn't want to admit that I was already alone in a marriage that only had one architect. I should have seen it then. The way he changed passwords without telling me. The sudden flurry of new contacts labeled only by first names. The way he always put his phone face down. They weren't just signs. They were red flags snapping in a wind I refused to feel. When I told him I'd cleared 2 weeks for the trip and booked the flights, his response was a dismissive wave. "You should go. You probably need the break more than I do." It felt like a shove cloaked in politeness. A gentle exile. He didn't even ask where I was going. So I stopped asking for his time. I stopped mentioning destinations. I stopped dreaming out loud. The silence between us grew louder. And yet, I kept playing my role. Faithful wife, successful urban planner, hopeful partner. But inside, a part of me had already started packing. Not for a vacation. For a future that didn't include waiting by the door, hoping he'd choose me over whatever client or crisis came next. The apartment was set for perfection. A private chef moved quietly in the kitchen, preparing Marcus's favorite dishes. Candles glowed on the table. A soft playlist hummed in the background. I stood by the window in a red gown he once said made me unforgettable, a glass of wine in my hand, watching the Chicago skyline blink through the night. It was our 5th anniversary. I had planned everything down to the second, reservation canceled in favor of an intimate dinner at home. I wanted to remind him of us, of who we used to be before work swallowed every piece of him. I didn't need grand gestures. I needed effort, presence, a sign that I still mattered. He was supposed to be home by 7. At 7:30, I texted. No reply. By 8, the chef looked at me awkwardly, unsure whether to plate the first course. At 9, the elevator chimed. I turned quickly, hope rising in my chest. Marcus walked in, Bluetooth in his ear, briefcase in hand. He gave me a nod, mouthed sorry, and walked straight to the bedroom while still mid-call. Not even a glance at the candles. Not one word about the dress. By the time he returned, he had swapped the headset for exhaustion. "Happy anniversary," he said half-heartedly, placing a small, flat package on the table. "Didn't forget." I opened it, hands trembling just enough to hide behind politeness. Inside were 2 first-edition architecture theory books. Rare. Expensive. Cold. "These are thoughtful," I said, my voice even. "What made you choose them?" He shrugged. "You're obsessed with this urban legacy stuff. Figured it fits." Then he sat down and reached for a breadstick. I nodded, lips tight. I'd seen the pink diamond necklace receipt a week before in that same briefcase. $700,000. Boutique jeweler. No note, just the name of the buyer and the date, 3 days before today. I hadn't said a word. I wanted to see what he'd do. And now I had my answer. I returned to the kitchen briefly, opened the bottom drawer where I'd hidden the Ferrari key, the one I had planned to give him after dessert. I stared at it. Matte black, etched with his initials. His dream car. My quiet celebration of everything we'd built. I closed the drawer and walked back to the table. The key stayed where it was. He didn't notice. He didn't ask if I had a gift for. He didn't ask how my day was, what I'd cooked, what I'd planned. The evening played out like a business dinner. Efficient. Empty. After the chef left, we went to bed in silence. No apology. No acknowledgement of what the night was supposed to mean. And lying there in the dark, I realized something. The moment he handed me those books, he didn't just forget our anniversary. He forgot me. I met Professor Leon Aris at our usual spot on campus. A quiet rooftop terrace lined with potted herbs and overlooking the skyline we both helped shape in theory and design. He poured the tea himself, always steeped exactly 3 minutes, just the way I liked. I don't even know why I'm here, I muttered, staring into my cup. You're here because you're exhausted, he said, and because you've built enough for everyone else. Maybe it's time to start building for yourself. I tried to smile, but it cracked halfway. I told him everything. How Marcus had pulled away, how our anniversary had been a disaster, how I'd found the receipt for the pink diamond necklace, and how he gave me books on obedience instead. Leon didn't interrupt. He just listened, nodding slowly, absorbing every detail. Men like Marcus, he said finally, they mistake charm for depth. But Elena, depth doesn't abandon you when things get inconvenient. That stayed with me. It echoed later that night when Marcus once again didn't come home. No explanation. No call. Just silence. The kind that gnaws at you until sleep is impossible. I was still awake when the motion alert lit up my phone, the Ferrari. The one he claimed he didn't even like driving. I opened the car cam feed. There he was. And beside him, Sophia Loren. She leaned in close, laughing like she belonged. Her long fingers brushed the pink diamond at her throat, and I knew instantly, it was the same necklace. The one he thought I'd never notice. The one he didn't give to me. My jaw tightened. I didn't text. I didn't wait. I threw on a coat and drove to the club where they'd just pulled up. The valet looked surprised when I handed over the ticket. Ma'am, I thought. It's my car, I said. As I slid into the Ferrari and circled to the front, I saw them coming out. Sophia was clinging to his arm like a trophy, one hand deliberately resting on the pink diamond, her smile smug and rehearsed. Marcus looked up. His expression didn't shift. No guilt. No panic. Just detached acknowledgement. Elena, he said flatly, as if I were the one intruding. I stepped out, calm as ice. Didn't realize my car was part of your date night package. Sophia chuckled softly. He said it was his gift. Sweet, isn't it? I looked at Marcus. He didn't deny it. You should be careful with things you haven't earned, I said to her, then turned back to the Ferrari and got in without another word. As I drove off, the wind rushing past, my hands steady on the wheel, I didn't feel rage or heartbreak. Just clarity. He hadn't just betrayed me, he'd underestimated me. And that was his real mistake. The next morning, I didn't bring up the club. Neither did he. Marcus walked into the kitchen like nothing had happened, sipping his coffee, scrolling through his phone. I watched him from across the marble island, not saying a word. There was nothing left to ask, and he'd made it clear there was nothing he was willing to explain. Later that day, he left in a rush. Again, another client call, another vague excuse. I waited 5 minutes, then opened the app connected to the Ferrari's internal cameras. He hadn't removed the access. Probably forgot, or didn't care. I tapped into the live feed. The car was already on Lakeshore Drive. And beside him, in the passenger seat, was Sophia Loren. She was laughing, hair tossed over her shoulder, legs casually crossed. She reached across him to adjust the music. The intimacy of it all made my stomach turn. He didn't even flinch. He looked relaxed, comfortable, like he was exactly where he wanted to be. I stared at the screen as they sped through the city, in my car. My pulse slowed, but not from sadness. Something else settled in. A quiet final shift. I was done. I closed the app. That evening, I called Professor Aris. Is the Zurich offer still on the table? I asked, already knowing the answer. It's yours, he said without hesitation. But you'll have to move fast. We present to the consortium next week. I'll be there, I replied. I need a new start. I packed light. Just enough to keep me comfortable while I figured out the next steps. The architecture firm I'd quietly co-founded, Apex Urban Futures, had always been my sanctuary, but I'd kept it low profile while Marcus built his empire. That time was over. I wasn't shrinking anymore to protect a man who resented my light. I waited until Marcus got home to say something. He was loosening his tie, heading toward the bedroom. I'm leaving tomorrow, I said. Zurich. He paused, one shoe off, the other still on. Zurich? He repeated, like it was the first time he'd ever heard the word. I've accepted a leadership role on the Aris project. It's long-term, high impact. He raised an eyebrow. That thing with your little firm? There it was. The disdain tucked inside every word. The reflex to belittle what he didn't control. I almost laughed. Yes, I said calmly. That thing with my firm. The one that's about to shape global urban development for the next decade. He shrugged. Do what you need to do. Just don't expect me to hit pause on my life while you play fantasy architect. No, I said. I don't expect anything from you anymore. He went silent then. Not out of guilt, not even out of understanding, just confusion. He couldn't wrap his head around the fact that I was no longer fighting for him, that I was choosing something bigger, something mine. I turned, walked to the door, and let the silence sit behind me like a closed chapter. The flight was booked. The future was waiting. And for the first time in a long time, I wasn't running, I was rising. The days in Zurich passed in a blur of blueprints, negotiations, and non-stop momentum. I barely had time to breathe, but it was the kind of exhaustion that fueled me. For once, my mind wasn't consumed by Marcus or his affairs. It was alive with vision. The Sustainable City project wasn't just ambitious, it was history in the making. And I was at the center of it. One morning, in the middle of a design strategy session, my phone buzzed. A message from Marcus. Let's just end this. It's not working anymore. I want a divorce. I stared at the screen for a long moment. No emotion rose. No anger. No sadness. Just a sense of finality I'd already made peace with weeks ago. My reply was as simple as it was honest. Agreed. I set the phone down, finished the meeting, and didn't bring it up again. Back in Chicago, the noise started to rise. I'd muted Marcus on social media, but Sophia wasn't subtle. Screenshots landed in my inbox from mutual friends. Posts of them sipping champagne in my apartment, photos of her hand on the Ferrari wheel, captions like, "Some women keep memories. Others drive them." I didn't respond. Not publicly. Not privately. She was performing for an audience I no longer sat in. When the divorce papers were finalized, I flew into Chicago for the signing. I arrived early, dressed professionally, composed, prepared to make this a formality and move on. But of course, drama rarely shows up quietly. Marcus was already there when I entered the law office conference room. He looked sharper than usual, tailored suit, controlled expression. His signature was already drying on the page when I took my seat. Then the door opened again. Sophia, wearing head-to-toe designer, a smug expression, and the same diamond necklace. She didn't belong in that room, but she made herself comfortable anyway, sliding into the seat beside Marcus like she was claiming her prize. "Didn't think you'd actually show," she said sweetly, brushing non-existent lint from her sleeve. "But I guess closure has its rituals." I turned to Marcus. "You brought her here?" She insisted. "Wanted to support me," he said, like he didn't hear how ridiculous he sounded. I reached into my bag and pulled out a folder. Quietly, I slid it across the table. "What's this?" Marcus asked, opening it. "Screenshots. Dozens of them. Sophia's texts. Voice notes. Petty jabs. Taunts. Photos taken from inside my home, clearly before the separation was formalized. Thought you might want to know what your support system has been up to," I said calmly. Sophia's face turned. "You really came prepared," she snapped. I was about to respond when we heard the deep rumble of an engine outside. A rare collector's car pulled up, the kind you only see at invitation-only showcases. Professor Eris stepped out, buttoning his coat, exuding quiet power and effortless grace. He walked in, eyes scanning the room until they landed on me. "Elena. Sorry I'm late." Sophia's mouth opened slightly. Recognition flickered in her expression. "That's Professor Leon Eris?" Marcus straightened. "You know him?" But Eris didn't look at them. Didn't acknowledge Sophia at all. He crossed the room and stood beside me. "Ready to go?" he asked, his voice low and certain. I stood. "Yes." Marcus said nothing. He just stared, at Eris, at me, at everything he'd failed to understand. We left without another word. A few days after the signing, I returned to Chicago with little fanfare. No announcements, no need to broadcast anything. The divorce was final, the drama contained. My focus was the Global Futures Summit, and every minute was accounted for. The Apex Urban Futures office was operating like a well-oiled machine. Every team was locked into place, and the entire city seemed to pulse with anticipation. The launch of Professor Eris's Sustainable City project had already drawn international attention, and the summit would be its global debut. Months of planning, and now it was ours to unveil. I kept my head down, working long hours with Eris, refining the final presentation, reviewing guest lists, and securing private sessions with government officials, environmental leaders, and tech investors. The momentum was real, and this time it was mine, earned, not gifted. Hugo, my right hand and Apex's COO, walked into my office late one night with his usual efficient stride and a faint smirk. "Vance Innovations RSVP'd," he said, placing a printed guest confirmation on my desk. "So did Lauron Holdings." I didn't even look up. "Good. You sure about that?" he asked, more curious than concerned. "Yes," I said. "Let them see." There was no bitterness in my voice. No spite. Just certainty. That same evening, my phone vibrated. A message request, Sophia. "Looks like you and Leon are a thing now. Cute. But don't get comfortable. You're still not on our level." I didn't waste a breath. I blocked her without a second thought. Minutes later, another one. "Marcus. Need a favor. Can you connect me to Eris? Might be a good opportunity for Vance Innovations." I stared at the message for a long moment. Then I blocked him too. It wasn't anger that drove my silence. It was detachment. He had made his choices. Now I was simply living mine. As the summit neared, the media attention surged. Our PR team was handling press requests around the clock. Still, I remained low-key, letting Eris take the spotlight. He preferred collaboration, not domination, and that aligned with everything Apex was about. We weren't chasing power, we were shaping futures. The night before opening day, Hugo returned to my office with something more amusing than urgent. "You'll want to hear this," he said, setting down his tablet. "Landon Shaw just found out who runs Apex." I scanned the forwarded email. Landon, longtime investor and close friend of Marcus, had been under the impression that Apex Urban Futures was a team effort, a collective, perhaps even an NGO. When someone told him I was the founder and lead architect, his reply was short and stunned. "Wait, Elena Reed is Apex? That's who Marcus divorced." I chuckled softly, sliding the tablet back. He'll figure it out soon enough. I didn't need to reply. The summit would speak louder than anything I could say. Tomorrow, the doors would open. Every invitee, industry leaders, policymakers, skeptics, supporters, and yes, even Marcus, would be there waiting to see what the future looked like. They had no idea it would look like me. The morning of the Global Futures Summit arrived crisp and bright, the Chicago skyline shimmering under a flawless sky. The venue, a restored historic hall beside the river, pulsed with anticipation. Urban developers, government leaders, journalists, and investors from around the world gathered, each drawn by one thing: Professor Leon Eris's revolutionary Sustainable City project, hosted exclusively by Apex Urban Futures. I arrived early, dressed in a sharply tailored navy suit, the Apex crest pinned subtly at my collar. Hugo met me at the private entrance with a quick nod and a finalized schedule in hand. "Press is set, security's tight, all keynotes confirmed," he reported, always 2 steps ahead. "You ready?" "I've been ready," I said quietly. By mid-morning, the grand hall was full. Rows of officials, CEOs, and scholars lined the polished wooden floors, while holographic displays projected future cityscapes above their heads. The energy was electric. Near the entrance, Marcus Vance stepped inside with Sophia on his arm. Her father, Charles Lauron, followed behind them, his sharp eyes scanning the crowd. They moved as a trio, confident, polished, and completely unaware. Marcus didn't see me at first. Neither did Sophia. They were too busy pointing out known names in the crowd, making comments under their breath. Then their path crossed Hugo's. Charles's face lit up. "You're Hugo Bennett, right? COO of Apex." Hugo extended a polite hand. "Yes, sir. We've been following Apex's work closely." "Remarkable reputation," Charles said, voice warm with calculated charm. "Is the founder here? I'd love to make an introduction. Heard Professor Eris is working closely with her." "What's her name again?" Hugo's smile didn't flicker. "She's just over there." He turned slightly and nodded toward me, standing near the front with Eris, reviewing last-minute notes. Marcus followed his gaze. His smirk faltered. Sophia stiffened. Charles squinted, then blinked. "Wait her." "Elena Reed," Hugo said smoothly. "She's our founder. My boss." The silence between them stretched longer than it should have. Charles's jaw tightened, Marcus said nothing, and Sophia's expression cracked for the first time. I caught their eyes briefly, calm, unreadable. Then I turned away, giving them nothing. Seats for Lauron Holdings and Vance Innovations? Sophia asked quickly, trying to recover. Hugo nodded. Third section midway back. You'll have a clear view of the screen. Not the front row? Charles asked, confused. Front rows reserved for heads of state, UN reps, and our leadership, Hugo replied with professional finality. They were ushered back without another word. From the stage, I could see them perfectly. Marcus slouched low, eyes darting between the podium and me. Sophia whispered to her father, who was too busy recalibrating his entire impression of me to respond. Professor Eris leaned in. They look surprised. They underestimated quietly, I said. Now they'll watch loudly. When my name was announced and I stepped onto the stage, I felt no nerves, only purpose. This was my moment, my project, my platform. And for once, Marcus, Sophia, and Charles were exactly where they belonged, on the outside looking in. A hush fell over the hall as my name echoed across the speakers. Elena Reed, founder and lead architect of Apex Urban Futures. I stepped forward to the center of the stage, the spotlight catching the crisp lines of my suit. Around me, holographic projections of sustainable city models floated in rhythmic rotation. Clean energy grids, vertical gardens, intelligent transit systems. They weren't just concepts anymore. They were the future, and they had my fingerprints on every frame. Applause rose, steady, respectful, growing. I didn't need to search the crowd to know where Marcus sat. Or Sophia. Or Charles Lauron. They'd be watching, stunned into silence, likely still trying to reconcile the woman in front of them with the woman they'd dismissed. I took a breath. Good morning, everyone, I began, voice strong, steady. Apex Urban Futures was founded not as a response to the problems of today, but as a vision of what tomorrow could be. Cities that don't just sustain, but elevate the human experience. Environments that heal, not harm. Systems designed not for profit, but for people. Faces turned toward one another, not. Investors leaned in. Journalists tapped their tablets. Cameras zoomed closer. I continued. We've partnered with global institutions, local governments, and innovative minds across discipline. But none have challenged, inspired, or elevated this vision more than the man I'm about to introduce, Professor Leon Eris. Applause surged as Eris joined me on stage, dignified as ever. He gave me a nod of silent gratitude before stepping to the podium. What followed was nothing short of a masterclass in innovation. Eris laid out the framework of the Sustainable City Project with precision and passion, showing models that integrated nature with technology, affordability with ambition. The room transformed into a living blueprint, a dream every attendee could touch. As his final slide faded, the response was immediate. Delegates from Europe, Asia, and Africa stood to pledge support. Private firms announced matching grants. Venture capitalists began coordinating follow-up sessions before the event had even ended. We had done it. No, I had done it. I stepped down from the stage during the break, allowing others to take the spotlight while I moved quietly through the back hallway toward the press room. That's when I heard him. Elena. I turned. Marcus stood alone near the corridor wall, away from Sophia, away from the noise. He looked smaller somehow, more human than I remembered. You never told me, he said, stepping closer. You owned Apex? I met his eyes without flinching. You never asked. He paused, searching for something, remorse maybe, or explanation. I didn't know. No, I said, voice cool. You didn't care to. He swallowed. I thought you were running a little firm. A side project. I laughed softly, not with humor, but clarity. That was always your problem, Marcus. You assumed the biggest things in the room belonged to you, or someone like you. I built this while you were busy building your ego. He looked down, ashamed. You deserved better than me. I know. I turned to walk away, but then Eris appeared at my side, having watched from a short distance. He nodded briefly at Marcus, then turned to me. The investors want you at the round table, he said. But take your time. You're the reason we're all here, after all. Marcus looked up, stunned again. You said Sophia was the visionary. I was being polite, Eris replied. Elena has always been the mind behind the mission. Sophia just likes standing next to power. I gave Eris a grateful look and walked with him, leaving Marcus behind, rooted in a reality he'd never imagined. Back in the main hall, the second session began. The crowd was re-energized, the conversations bolder. I could hear my name carried between tables. For years, I'd worked in quiet rooms and long nights, underestimated and invisible. Now, I was unmistakable. Triumph didn't feel like revenge. It felt like arrival. The celebration banquet was in full swing, the rooftop garden aglow with amber lights, and the low hum of conversation. Laughter floated across the terrace, where investors and dignitaries clinked glasses and congratulated each other on a summit that had already made history. But I stood a few steps away, alone by the railing, watching the skyline shimmer in the night. The stars were out, but the city lights burned brighter. Somewhere in the distance, I could hear the lake breeze rushing against the shore. For the first time in years, there was no weight pressing on my chest. No fear of being seen as too much or not enough. Just stillness. Strength. Footsteps behind me. I didn't have to turn to know who it was. "You always vanish when the party gets too loud," Professor Eris said gently. I smiled without looking. Old habit. I like to watch from the edge. "See what I built." He stepped beside me, silent for a while. Then, with a quiet reverence, he said, "You did something rare, Elaine. You turned pain into power, betrayal into blueprint. This entire movement, it started with your courage." I looked over at him. "And your belief?" He gave me a knowing smile. "Belief is easy when someone shows you what's possible." We stood there, shoulder to shoulder, as fireworks began to bloom over the water. They reflected in the glass towers and danced on the surface of the river. I didn't flinch or shield my eyes. I welcomed the noise, the light. It felt earned. I thought of all the moments that brought me here, the cold dinners, the stolen Ferrari, the way he looked at me like I was ornamental. But I also thought of the nights drafting blueprints, the mornings reviewing permits, the quiet strength it took to stay the course while being invisible to the one person who was supposed to see me. Not anymore. I turned back to the city with a steady breath. There was still so much to build, projects, partnerships, maybe even something more with the man beside me. But whatever came next, I was ready. Because I hadn't just survived the storm. I had become the architect of my own horizon. Do you think I was right to stay silent and let my success speak for itself? Or should I have confronted Marcus when I had the chance? I'd really love to know what you think. Drop your thoughts in the comments. And if my story resonated with you, make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you don't miss the next one.